You're going back? Right. So, who knows what are the different nutrient categories? How many categories would you say there are? Any guesses? 3, 4, 5? Okay. Let's carry on. Right. So we've got 5 main categories of food, of nutrients. So we've got macronutrients, minerals, trace elements, fat-soluble vitamins, and water-soluble vitamins. You can divide this up in different ways, but this is an easy way of understanding nutrients. So under the macronutrients, we've got carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And then the minerals are the ones in larger quantities. So calcium, phosphate, magnesium, sodium, chloride, and potassium. Next! And then we have the trace elements. These are also, we can also call these minerals, but they're required in smaller concentrations. And even this list here isn't comprehensive. There are other very small quantities of other minerals that are required for humans. Next. Right. Then 2 categories of vitamins. We have the water-soluble ones. So a whole bunch of B vitamins, also vitamin C. So these are the ones that you have to take more frequently because they're water-soluble, and if you take too much, you just excrete them again. And then fat-soluble vitamins are the ones that you can store a little bit more easily in the body. So this is just to give you an idea of the range of different nutrients that are required. And these are actually just the essential nutrients. There are plenty of other substances in food that aren't strictly essential, but nevertheless are nourishing. So a whole range of bioflavonoids and phytochemicals which can perform some of the same functions as the essential nutrients, but you don't have to have each and every one of them. Right, so we're going to start off with what I thought would be an interesting little introduction to the nutrients. So how can we work out from looking at a particular food what kind of nutrients it's got in it? So if we look at this one, you'll see a variety of fruits and vegetables. They're different colours. That's one clue. And the different types of parts of the plant that's consumed perform different functions. So for example, we've got roots that provide storage for the next generation, same as seeds, same as nuts, this is the storage function. Then you've got leaves providing a photosynthetic function. So when you look at a type of food, think about what is its function, and that will give us a clue as to what kind of nutrient content it has. So some of the functions, for example, the antioxidants. We think of oxygen as a good thing, but actually oxygen can also be damaging to tissues. So the antioxidants, vitamin A, carotenoids, vitamin C, for example. And then there's storage and energy function. So the plants are storing it in terms of with either carbohydrates or fats usually. So that's a consideration. If you think the plant has a storage function, it's probably got carbohydrates or fats in it. And then if you think of seeds and nuts, they have to store a lot of nutrients to start off the next generation, so they're going to be quite nutrient dense. So this is a good way of thinking about how to get nutrient-dense foods through storage. And then I mentioned about the photosynthesis. So for a plant to photosynthesize, it needs a lot of different nutrients. So when you see that the plant is photosynthesizing, you'll know that there's plenty of nutrients there. And then the structure would contain plant complex carbohydrates, possibly calcium as well. And then thinking about the colour, so the red, orange, yellow sort of colours, usually containing some kind of carotenoids, an antioxidant. The green colour we know is chlorophyll, green leaves. And then thinking about animal foods, you know that the red colour is hemoglobin or myoglobin. So that red colour, you know that's likely to be containing a lot of iron. And then this interesting kind of tan colour, which would show that there's B vitamins and dietary fibre. So now we're going to see who's been concentrating, and I want you to shout out what nutrients would you think would be there and what's going on. Anybody want to hazard a guess? So what's happening with this leaf? I can't hear you. Magnesium, yeah, that's right, because it's got the chlorophyll in there. Another thing about the leafy vegetables that's interesting is, you know, antioxidants are there to protect the plant from oxidation. So a leaf has an enormous surface area. So all around the surface of the leaves, you have to have antioxidants. So you know that if you've got something leafy, that it's going to have a lot of antioxidants, because there's a large surface area to be protected against the oxygen. So that's a couple of things just from looking at a leaf that you can tell. It's got antioxidants, it's got the magnesium and the different nutrients that are required for photosynthesis. So what do you think is going on here? It's a root. Yeah. So the root is there, it's storing carbohydrates. So we know that when we're eating roots, this is the storage of the plant. It's going to have carbohydrates. It's also going to have a lot of different minerals. Okay. What about this? What does the colour tell you? Carotene. Yeah, this is kind of the name kind of gives it away. So the carrot has carotene, which is an antioxidant. And what else would you expect to find in there? Vitamin A, yeah. Well, the precursor of vitamin A. Yeah. And on the outside, you know when you peel vegetables that you can lose some of the vitamin C. Do you know why is that? Because the oxygen, because the antioxidants have to be on the outside to protect the vegetable from oxygen. So if you peel the vegetable, you're taking most of the vitamin C away. So this is why people say don't peel too much your vegetables. Just take enough off to take the mud away, but don't peel very thickly, because you'll be taking the vitamin C. So what do you think is happening there? So what's the colour?
red.
Yes, so the red colour is a special type of carotenoid called lycopene, which is potentially protective against cancer. But it's also got your regular antioxidants in there with that colour. It's always good to include in your diet reds, oranges, yellows. What do you think? What do you think of the nutrients here?
Minerals.
Yes, so you've got some minerals there. But the function of this grain is to provide a little package of nutrients to start off the new plant. So you have to have in the germ you have a lot of nutrients concentrated. So the essential fatty acids and the minerals and the protein, and then all around the outside there's a lot of B vitamins as well, and in the centre you get your carbohydrate. So what happens if you take this whole grain and then you process it and make some pastries with white flour? What do you think has happened?
It is processed.
Yeah.
Then you lose the goodies.
Yeah, you lose by processing, because the goodies are a lot of them on the outside. So if you process and take that away, you're left with more just carbohydrate and some protein in the middle. And if you take away the germ, this is the really nutrient-dense part of the grain. So what happens sometimes in the milling industry, for example, you process the grain, take away the best part, which gets sometimes fed to animals, keep the carbohydrate, which is made into bread and pasta and pizza and all those things. So we've lost a lot of our nutrition to start with. So in a way, if you're looking for the easiest way to improve your nutrient intake, how you process your food and knowing where the nutrients are in the food is actually quite helpful. So this is why, whole food, you talk about whole foods and brown rice and brown wholemeal bread. This is why. So this is another type of storage with nuts. And it's the same idea with the nut. The nut has to hold all those nutrients ready to start a whole tree. So the nut will germinate and turn into a walnut tree. So it has to have a lot of nutrients to get that tree started. But what's interesting with the nuts as compared with the seeds is they tend to be use more fat for their storage than carbohydrate. So you get nuts with a bit more fat in them. So it's, again, nutrient dense. So, yeah, but with the nuts, it's not really the same thing as the grains that you can take the outside layer off. Obviously, you have to take the outside layer of the walnut if you want to keep your teeth. But once you have the full walnut, you don't have to process that anymore. So the whole nuts are usually quite good. And the reason I've shown the picture of the tree as well. So what is it? What do you think? Eating things from trees. What would be the benefit of eating food from a tree rather than an annual crop, for example?
I guess that the roots can search, the roots from a tree can search minerals from deeper.
Yeah.
And we get,
Yes. So the tree has a long time to establish itself in the soil. It has roots, a root system, and mycorrhizal fungi. It has a way of really searching far and wide for the nutrients that it needs. So that's why you end up with quite good mineral profile in nuts. for example, because Brazil nuts very high in selenium, for example. Whereas if you're growing an annual crop, there's less time for the plant to establish to get all those rich nutrients from different parts of the soil. So just knowing that you're eating something from a tree, it gives you a clue. What do you think you find in fruits? So fruits, when we eat them, they're quite sweet, aren't they? Yeah. So we've got different types of sugars. Glucose and fructose. Yeah. So I mean, there are also plenty of vitamins. But the fruit is trying to make itself attractive to being eaten, so that the seeds will get distributed. So it's this kind of sweet thing that you want to eat. It's sort of saying to you, eat me. That's why and you only eat them when they're nice and sweet. So I think we just got two. So the last one. What about the fish? Anybody got any ideas? Okay, there's one. Fatty acids. So what's very interesting about some of the fatty fish is that they swim in cold water. Okay, and we know about different fats. If you have a polyunsaturated fat, then it stays liquid at a lower temperature. So for the fish to be able to move, it doesn't want its fat to become solid. Okay? This is a sort of funny way of thinking about it, but fish living in cold waters need to have a lot of polyunsaturated fat. So if you eat these oily fish, you're going to get polyunsaturated fats. So that's one way of thinking about why they're polyunsaturated fats in the fish. It's because they need to stay liquid rather than solidify. Because if the fish was full of butter and it went in the cold water, it would sort of turn a bit solid. So you think of it like that. And then this is the final one, I think. So what does the colour tell you with that? So it's got the myoglobin, it's got the hemoglobin. What? Iron. So we've got the iron. So it's a little introduction to give you an idea of how to understand, just for yourselves, what do the different foods contain, and two, how to recognise different nutrients from different foods, and also why it is that we need to have a balance of lots of different foods in our diets, because not any one food contains everything that you need, so you have to match them up. Okay, any questions on that?
Also, vitamin B12.
Yeah, vitamin B12 is the one that you get from, it's from animal products, but including bacteria. So you can get it from some fermented foods. The question comes up for vegans a lot about this B12. So the fermented foods have some, but the animal source foods are the best sources of vitamin B12. It's a particular B vitamin that doesn't really appear in these vegetable foods on the whole. Do you have a question? Oh.
Yes. We have a microphone if someone will have a question and want it to be heard by all. So then raise your hand and I will give you the microphone. Yes, no.
Okay, well we can move on. What time did we go to, by the way? I forgot.
Until 12:30.
Oh, it's another hour. Sure. Right, well we've got time, we've definitely got time if anybody wants to make any comments about what we've done so far, any suggestions. Okay.
You said that it's possible to get vitamin B12 from vegetable fermented food, but what is the biological yield in the body if you eat animal products or vegetable fermented products with B12?
What is the what?
Biological yield.
Oh, like how much do you need to consume? Yeah, I can't answer you straight off the top of my head on that one. I mean, the animal source foods are the better source of vitamin B12. And if you're going to be a vegan, you've got to be careful and look for the foods. And sometimes you just need to take a supplement of it. But if you're not being careful and looking out all those different types of food sources, but it's always a controversy for vegans, this B12. And it's not something I've researched super much, but there are whole books about it you can look up. But my understanding is, I mean, for nursing mothers, for example, you want to be careful. And, you know, if you've got very high nutrient demands at some time during your life cycle, then you've got to be very careful with B12 because it's there and it helps to build your blood. And at a time when you need it most, you know, that's when you want to make sure you don't want to be messing around and not getting enough.
I suppose we're going to get to that, but I'm wondering what happens to nutrients after thermal treatment, meaning cooking? How much of the essential is lost? You talked about the colors. If you place this meat on a pan, it will change color to brown. So what happens to the nutrient?
Well, that's interesting. Yes, I mean, you don't lose the iron from cooking meat, but you do lose some of the nutrients. For example, cooking things in water. If you throw away the water, then a lot of these water-soluble nutrients you're going to be losing. So that's another reason why, you know, when you're cooking vegetables, for example, you don't want to cut them up too small, releasing all those nutrients into the water and then throw away the water. You know, in England, it's a big habit of ours to cook vegetables in water, and then you drain the vegetables and the nutrients have gone down the sink. So it's not such a good practice. If you can be steaming or making soups, that kind of thing, then you hang on to the nutrients in the water. But the other thing about it is fresh food, so a lot of these nutrients can disappear when they're exposed to the air. If you keep them for a long time, if they get bruised, you're all losing a bit of nutrient from that. So the best idea is to have freshly harvested, freshly cooked, freshly prepared as much as possible. I can't quantify for you all these things, but this is a qualitative idea that you want to, you want to try and preserve your nutrients as best you can. But yeah, the colour of meat changing, this is not going to affect. It's not going to affect the eye. Anything else? Okay, now let's move on. This was another point that I wanted to make from this. In the field of nutrition, it's very easy to talk about nutrients one by one. You know, what do you need? There's just a few nutrients, the main ones you need. But what is interesting is to realize these very strong interactions between different nutrients. And for any one function, a whole array of different nutrients are required. So I'm not going to read them all out, but you get the idea. For metabolizing carbohydrate, you need a whole array of B vitamins. For building your red blood cell, you need a whole range of minerals and vitamins. And as for making bone, you see nearly every nutrient that you can think of is there. So our bodies work very much in concert, and we need to have a balance of all these things. So now I'm going to move on to the second part of this, which is around nutrient quality of food changing over time, which is based on a piece of research that I did a long time ago. It was 20 years ago, this piece of work. But I was asking the question of what has happened to the quality of our food during the time that agriculture changed so much. So we know after the Second World War, there was a big change in agriculture, the increased use of artificial fertilizers, for example, agricultural chemicals, increased yields through the application of these. And then, of course, came the Green Revolution that Uma was talking about earlier on, with increased yield of wheat and rice, for example. So anyway, the question was, what has happened to the nutritional quality of food during this period? And also, what could be the causes of any change that you see, and what are some of the consequences? So what I'll do is present some results of this research that I did. Then we'll think about what are some of the causes, and then hopefully we'll get time for you to discuss in small groups what do you think we could then do. So the final question is, what is to be done? What can we do? So interestingly, in the UK, the government has been producing these composition of food tables periodically, starting, the first one came out in the 1930s, and then there was but what's interesting is that although lots of different issues of the composition of foods came out, the same data repeated again and again, and new recipes added, new processed foods, etc. But I was interested particularly in the nutritional quality of raw foods, because making the link to agriculture, you have to just look at the raw foods, because if you look at cooked foods, then all those complex issues of processing will come in. So my question was just about raw foods. And I've highlighted in red when there was new data, so 1936, but then not again till 1991 were the data actually reanalyzed. And then in 2013, a small subset were reanalyzed, but not many of them. So I had these two time points to compare. So this is, as I say, this is 20 years old now. The paper that I published looking at this, and surprisingly, nobody was asking the same question at that time. So I'll just cut straight to the data here. So this is a comparison of, it's about 50 years difference between data of the nutrient content of fruit and vegetables in the 1930s right through to the 1980s. And highlighted in red, you'll see where there was so-called statistical significance. So this is where the data are the most robust. So the calcium, magnesium, copper, sodium, all significantly reducing in vegetables. And then in fruits, we've got magnesium, iron, copper, potassium, and also the dry matter, meaning that the fruit has got more watery. So I was quite amazed by this, because these were published data produced by the Ministry of Agriculture in the UK, but as far as I could tell, nobody had put the two sets of data together and said what's going on. So we've got the previous data were before the time of industrialization of agriculture, and the later data were after these huge food systems changes. And what's interesting is that it's just a phenomenon going across the nutrients. So it's not just one or two, there's a lot of them. And all of them essential to human nutrition. So the p-value, don't worry about the p-value, that's for people who are interested in statistics, they'll know what that's all about. But just to notice that the red highlighted ones are the most important ones. So then it turns out that it's not just the fruit and vegetables, so there are other researchers looking at other foods. So here, this is David Thomas, who did a comparison of these other foods as well. So we find again similar sort of reductions in a lot of the essential nutrients in meat, in milk, in cheese, all coming down as well. And then a colleague of mine in the USA got in touch with me and said, I'm interested in that work you did. I've done a similar comparison in the USA with US foods, and although not so many nutrients, so this is data from the United States Department for Agriculture, USDA. This is the equivalent, same idea as our Ministry of Agriculture. So you find 23% calcium down, iron down 27%, phosphorus down 14%. So it's the same sort of idea. And then this is looking at wheat. It's not quite presented in the same way, but here you see some of the historical varieties of wheat and the modern varieties of wheat and the change. And we're finding the same phenomenon going on with wheat as well. So we've got reductions in wheat minerals. And the last column there is the correlation between the yield. Now this is an important point here, that as the yield or the productivity of the wheat increases, so the mineral content comes down. And this is something that we call a dilution effect. So as you get the plant to produce a higher yield, so the nutrient content comes down. So this is something that agricultural scientists know about, but nutritionists on the whole don't, and yet there it is. So if you get a high yielding variety, then the likelihood is that the nutrient content will be less.
How do you call again this phenomenon? How do you call this phenomenon again? Dilution?
It's called dilution effect. So dilution, it's like the minerals are getting diluted by the amount of carbohydrate. So let me stay with that for a minute. Are there any questions from those slides? Any clarifications? Did you understand what I'm on about? Anybody want to ask a question related to those ones? As clear as mud or as clear as water? Okay.
So about the dilution, just to make sure I understand it well, if you have an apple tree and you have suddenly a beautiful harvest, much more like almost double amount of fruit than the year before, that would mean that my apple that year might be less, that because of the dilution effect might be less nutritious than the yield the year before that would be half? Does that work for a tree, or is that?
Yeah. Oh, actually, that's quite a difficult question. I think it's okay. I don't think I've got enough data to be able to answer that very clearly, but it depends to a certain extent how was the yield achieved. How was the yield achieved? And this also introduces the next point that I was going to make about there's actually these two types of dilution effect. So there's the one that's caused by sort of forcing yield sort of beyond the natural level of yield that the plant wants, if you like. So adding a lot of fertilizers, for example, it doesn't have time to gather the nutrients that it needs from the soil. It's sort of forced to grow quickly. So that can be brought about by adding too much fertilizer. But there's the other one, which is called a genetic dilution effect, which is when plants are being bred successive generations to produce a high yield rather than to have a high nutrient content. In your example with the apple, then obviously from one year to the next you haven't changed the genetics, but yeah, it could be that the bigger, if each apple is bigger, the likelihood is that it's probably a little bit more watery or a little bit more of carbohydrate to nutrients, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. So I think I can't answer your question properly, actually.
I don't know really well how to formulate, but if now the nutrient content of the product of the vegetables is lower, does it mean that we need to eat more, a bigger quantity to get the same amount of nutrients?
Question? Yes, so the question is about, do we need to eat more to get the same amount of nutrients? And I think, quite honestly, the answer is yes. Yes, if we're eating these typically grown fruit and vegetables. What I should point out, actually, is that with the comparisons that I showed, there isn't any systematic sampling for organic versus non-organic. This was a sample taken at 2 periods of time to represent what was available in the shops at that time. So it's not a controlled experiment at all. Yeah, it's just those 2 periods of time. But if we took now an average basket of foods compared with an average basket of foods from the 1930s, yeah, I mean, it means you do need to eat a bit more of something to get all the nutrients that you need, or you need to change your diet and have more nutrient-dense foods to get the same. But in the case of the fruit, it's quite interesting that they were, because the dry matter decreased, means that the fruit is more watery. So, in a way, it's easier to compensate by eating more fruit that's watery, than if the food is diluted by carbohydrate. There's a limit to how much carbohydrate you can eat. So it means that you just can't go on and on eating more of the food because you'll get full up too quickly. So in a way, it means that you've got to have more nutrient-dense foods in order to meet your requirements if the content has gone down. So the implications are kind of big.
Well, I was just going to ask. Have you seen yet any implications, or is that step too far from the what's happening with people's health? Can you make that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I'll show you a slide a little later about that, I think, rather than leaping into it. I think it's quite difficult to tell, to be honest with you. because this is like everybody's having the same thing happening to them. So it's not so easy. Okay, remind me, I'll come back to that later. Okay, should we go on? So, yeah, the next question, what could be causing this? So in the introduction to the composition of food tables, this is what they said. This can happen when there are new varieties or new sources of supply of raw materials, new farming practices that can affect the nutritional value of both plant and animal products. So I was, to be honest with you, a little amazed that there it was, published in the book, but with very little, fanfare or so. What's going on? This sort of outcry. But it was in. These reasons are actually given in the book. So I mentioned this already. So the changes in varieties, and there's a little bit of research looking at this around wheat, around broccoli, around maize. So as we introduce new varieties that are designed for high yield, changes in the method of agriculture that I mentioned, the dilution effect. Now this is the other one, which is a bit scary, is about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this is some research done by a scientist in the United States, Irakli Lockhart, who did his work about the same time as I did, and he's had the most enormous difficulty getting it published, but his overall conclusion is that probably with rising carbon dioxide levels, that there could be as much as a 9% reduction in nutritional quality of food. So the reductions that I saw of about 30%, 40%, so we could say that part of that we could attribute to rising carbon dioxide levels. So, and it's becoming more recognised now that greater carbon dioxide in the atmosphere boosts carbohydrate production and boosts this dilution effect that I was talking about. So that's another part of it. And then, of course, there's what's going on in the soil, which is also related to these dilution effects, but you can think of it as a slightly separate phenomenon. So we know, I'm not going to go into it at great length, but we know that healthy soil produces healthy plants produce healthy people. The mycorrhiza is a special fungus that forms symbiosis with plant roots and is able to scavenge minerals from a wide area. And we know that this fungus is destroyed by repeated ploughing, it's destroyed by the use of agricultural chemicals. So this fungus that is our friend for nutrition can get destroyed by industrial type of agriculture. And there's very, very little research that's been done on this phenomenon, almost nothing. So there's a lot of scope for people who are interested to look further into this. And then there's this sort of catch-all idea of changes in the food system. So obviously during pre-war to the 1980s, a lot of changes in the source of food. We get a lot of food from abroad that we might have been growing at home in the 1930s. So the food is grown on different soils and different climates and different storage techniques. Lots of changes there, so it's quite tricky to account for all those in this comparison. Then the last one is changes in the method of analysis. So are we sure that there really is a change, or is it just some kind of anomaly? which was a question that I looked into a lot, and finally I got the answer from the people in the ministry who said that the methods have changed a lot, but the accuracy hasn't changed. So they stand by the quality of the data, even though the methods have changed. So I think this last one we're going to dismiss. Okay, so what have I got now? No, I'm not going to go into that. I'll leave this slide up here, and what I'd like you to do is, because I've been speaking far too long already, is if you go into little groups of 4 or 5, just the people around you, and have a little discussion. So if you're a farmer and you know this, what would you do? What could you do as a farmer to try and make things better? It's quite a simple version. So what could we do as farmers to try and improve the nutritional quality of the food? So shall we have, see how you get on, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour in small groups. Any questions on that before? Do you need any clarifications from me? Right, okay, shall we come back together? Does everybody have enough time? Yeah. Good. All right, so hopefully you've had some interesting discussions. Does anybody want to share any points that you came up with from your group? Any observations, ideas? What I realised just now is that I've been presenting this very much from an Anglo focus, Anglo-centric. This is what happened in the UK. So another question for you might be, in your countries, which are very different, do you think this has happened where you are as well? Or do you think this is some horrible English phenomenon? Well, an English and a US phenomenon. Do you think it's happening all over? That's another question, maybe to throw in that I didn't think of before. But anybody we've got a microphone. Who'd like to make a comment from your discussions? Shall we go around the groups? Give you a chance? Anything from your group? They're still talking. We've got one over there.
We would use organic compost, like as a fertilizer. We would change up the yields frequently. We would use permaculture. We would stand by quality over quantity. We would not use genetically modified seeds. We would encourage the ecosystem, and we would create an appropriate environment for keeping the yield without losing property.
Okay. This sounds good. Good. Anybody else from your group want to add anything? Anybody else from your group wants to add?
We are trusting.
Which countries are you from?
From Romania.
Everyone?
From Romania.
Oh, okay. So do you think this is a similar situation in Romania, or do you think your agriculture is very different?
We have local producers in Romania, but the law is not necessarily encouraging them, so that's an issue. Okay. local producers are not encouraged to sell their products.
Okay. Should we go to Thank you. Thank you. I'm not disagreeing with any of what you've said.
Okay, obviously no one else wants to speak. I actually agree the trades of what we actually discussed, all the same things they said. But the main conclusion that got to, you asked about what the farmer can do. Well, our conclusion is that farmers can't do short-term anything, but long-term, if you change the system of production, then long-term, those things could go back to the status that we have. Because if you said that there obviously needed time for a shift in the numbers of levels of minerals in the products, I think that if we go back to traditional, let's say traditional way of production of food, those levels would go back to the starting point. I mean, that's the only thing that we actually concluded here. And the second thing that you actually asked about, the differences between countries about the ways. I think that there are now big differences in production, because obviously economic system is everywhere the same, so production is always similar. But as they mentioned, especially in Southeast Europe, there are still small producers that actually produce just for themselves. So they have the possibility, the choice to do whatever they want with their products.
I suppose it speaks to the question, so are the farmers totally in control of their system? What do they have control over and what do they not have control over? It's something to think about as we go along.
Farmers still have the opportunity to use their own seeds.
Yeah.
So that's the clue how you can preserve the traditional way and the levels of also.
Yeah, so I think that this thing about the quality of the seeds is something which Gisela is going to talk about later. I think she could talk about it now, should I? Okay. Thank you. Who else would like to say something from their discussion? Don't worry, I can give you mine.
So we got to talk about the motivation of the farmers, like why is the farmer motivated to do all those things, and we started talking about who are the farmers producing for? Because if you're producing for supermarkets, then you need to be probably preferring quantity over quality. And if you only have, let's say, community-supported agriculture where there's a smaller system of consumers that you can really directly communicate with and speak with them about all these issues and raise the awareness, then you probably have a very different possibilities. Also in terms of, we talked about like changing the cropping system, that on one land you have something and after 3 years you change it up, etc. But if you have a contract with supermarkets, then you might not be able to do that because you would end up with no produce. So it's maybe not only about the physical things that you do with the land, but also about the cooperation with, the consumers, whether those are people themselves or schools or any other institutions, restaurants, etc.
I think you're very interesting because it raises one issue that we haven't mentioned yet, is that when people buy food in supermarkets, or how much do they know about how the food was grown? How much do they know about the actual nutritional quality of that food? Nobody's selling food based on its nutritional quality, and you don't get an analysis just easily available of all these different types of foods and what's their quality. So the consumers, it's not so easy for them to buy food based on the nutritional quality because the information isn't really available. So that's, and the power of the supermarkets to force farmers to grow in a certain way. And that's another issue. Again, the thing of how much control do farmers actually have? It's a question that I come back to.
No, that was where we spent our time.
Yeah. So any idea which groups? I've lost track of which groups. This group is still thinking, I know. Would you like to make any comment? Isn't there? No. All right. Anybody else?
Maybe one point, we talked about the perennial system, that there is much more talk nowadays about farming systems that are based on perennial crops rather than annual crops. So as a farmer, you have the choice to incorporate more perennial than annual, or to transform it altogether. And that means more trees, but also just rethink the whole system and maybe go for more for products like nuts and fruits and offer that to the local food community.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Yes, this idea of diversifying cropping and the various systems that you can use to do that, the agroforestry and the mixed cropping and the alley cropping, plenty of different ways to do that. And then think about what's the agricultural policy like? Is that being supported? Is this diverse type of agriculture being supported or not? So it brings to more questions anyway. Okay, well, I think we'll move on at this point, unless anybody else would like to contribute from your discussion. Okay. Right, so as I mentioned, this was a long time ago that I did this. Some of the responses that have been there, which I found some of these a little disappointing. So there'd been a lot of activity on the internet, and lots of dietary supplement producers have used this evidence to say, well, this means that people should be taking dietary supplements. Not necessarily in response just to this piece of work, but there's been some plant breeding efforts to try and improve particularly iron and zinc or vitamin A in different crops, which, I mean, we welcome in a way that the plant breeders have been adjusting the criteria for breeding to think about nutrients, but my criticism of it is that these tend to be one nutrient at a time. So you take rice and think, well, how can we get more iron in rice? How can we get more zinc in rice? How can we get greater vitamin A? And some of the breeding efforts have gone beyond normal breeding, and I know Uma in parallel session is talking about this golden rice. So this is a very reductionist, let's just take one nutrient and add it in one food. This is not really, to my mind, a holistic way of dealing with this problem, to pick off one nutrient at a time and see what to do with it. So there's a whole other debate to be had about that, but my general feeling is that we want to look more holistically, and remembering that so many different nutrients are needed for so many different functions, it makes no sense to my way of thinking to just go for one at a time. So yes, and like these single micronutrient supplements, there's a similar version in agriculture where you apply just one nutrient. So you might have a foliar feed of zinc, for example. And my question is, well, what about what's happening to all the other nutrients? So these have been some of the rather non-holistic ways. And my question is, some of the points that you've been bringing up, what about the use of traditional varieties? What about agrobiodiversity? What about all the diversity of crops that are out there and trying to use them? And then to think a little bit more about this soil health, plant health, human health connections. This is considered in scientific circles as a little bit folksy to talk about. It's not considered proper science to come out with an expression like this: soil health, plant health, human health. It's not how scientific research tends to work, but it's the way that it should work, and we should think about how can we really bring this into a sort of scientific forum, perhaps. And then, as I mentioned, I think we've all grasped this idea of the agroecological processes which are likely to support this soil health, and the mixed farming systems and the rotations. Plenty of ways that improved systems can happen, but they need to be supported by a proper policy. This kind of thing needs to be a part of the thinking of policy as well. Oh yes, so I was going to come back to this consequences for human nutrition, which, as I mentioned, it's quite nebulous actually, and it's quite difficult to really show what has been the consequences of this. I mean, can we say over this period that people's diets have deteriorated? I mean, we know that chronic illnesses are increasing, and especially looking globally, micronutrient deficiency is terribly widespread. I mean, we've got about 2 billion people in the world suffering from micronutrient deficiencies. So my way of thinking is that every little helps. If you are having a very restricted diet to start with, then you want to have the best possible nutritional profile from the food that you do have. This is just one point in time. Again, this is from the UK. This is not a developing country. And what you see here this is the percentage of people with their average daily dietary intakes of these various minerals below the lower reference point. And it's something that's not talked about very much. So across the top you have the different age groups. So for example, for the teenagers, 11 to 18, you've got quite large percentages upon not meeting even the lowest recommended intake. So magnesium, that one that we get from the green leafy vegetables, and one that nutritionists are hardly talking about is magnesium. Nobody's talking about magnesium. People are talking about iron, and with due reason. We've got 26% of these teenagers not taking enough iron. But across the range, it's not a pretty picture for teenagers. And I wouldn't put this down to exactly the issue about the diminishing nutrient content. It's a much broader issue to do with the types of food people are eating and the types of diet. And I think we have a long way to go. And my point is that we want to do the best we can to get these nutrients. Any questions or comments on that point? So this is sort of final idea really, is about what kind of recommendations would we want to make. So when we talked earlier on about farmers, so there are lots of other people involved with this food system, and what can they do? So we've got another few minutes, so maybe just 5 minutes in your same groups. If you can pick any one of these groups that you like, and think, well, what if you were recommending what to do about this problem to any of these groups? What would you recommend? So you don't have to pick all of them, just one group that you like the look of. What do you think? What could you do? So is that clear? So we've got a ministry, a government department. We've got researchers, policy makers, nutritionists, consumers, and then finally teachers. So what could you, maybe teachers might be the one you're thinking about, but if you have any ideas for any of these other groups of people to improve the nutritional quality of foods. So we haven't got long, but even just very quickly. Right, shall we just come back again? So we've got just a few minutes left now. Everybody's still discussing. And it's getting noisy. Anybody wants to volunteer anything from their latest discussion? We have one.
So we discussed about consumers and decided that consumers should demand information about nutritional value. For example, shops should publish how much nutrients do producers own.
Thank you very much. So we've got one idea there about supermarkets publishing more data on the nutritional value to inform the consumers. Okay, any suggestions from other groups? Something that you came up with that you'd like to share?
Policymakers should adapt the laws in order to allow small local producers to sell their products and therefore encourage Romanian traditional producers to supply their needs.
So, sorry, it's about what's your policy idea?
The policymakers should adapt the laws in order to allow small local producers to sell their products and therefore encourage Romanian tradition.
Okay.
Because your King Charles loves Romania and local tradition, but our government now don't let it.
Okay.
Doesn't.
Right, thank you.
We talked of the Department of Agriculture to promote and give consumers incentives to build green touches at their home, and they promote more individual parts, individual agriculture for the family.
I didn't really hear.
The Department of Agriculture should give more incentives to the families.
Oh, yes.
To build their own green tech and they grow their own harvest.
Okay. That's a nice idea. So we've got trying to encourage through policy small farmers and each person having their own place to grow. It's okay. Everybody else wants to share? I'll show you some of the ideas. I'll show you some of the ideas that I had on these topics, and then I think we better stop. Everybody seems to be milling around having their lunch. So this was some of the ideas that I had when I presented this. So for our Department of Agriculture, the recommendation is to more frequently monitor the nutritional quality of food. So we only have these 2 time points with a 50-year gap. So the recommendation is to look at the nutritional quality of food more frequently and publish the results. So for the research, to have these partnerships between nutritionists and agriculture people, actually doing some more research on the quality of foods, looking at the agronomic traits and the different breeding. Policymakers, so what have I got here? So a rethink on this whole productionist paradigm, because if increasing yields means lower nutritional quality, we've got to rethink this whole idea of pushing for high production all the time. Then the nutritionists, and that includes me, to work more on this understanding of the interconnectedness of nutrients for health and think about more holistic solutions than these single nutrients, which I have to admit some of this single nutrient stuff comes from nutritionists. And then the consumers, it's about, don't stop eating fruit and vegetables. You've got to keep eating your fruit and vegetables, organic if possible. And also to think about this, what happens afterwards in the processing to maintain as much nutritional quality as you can. So those were some of the ideas that I came up with. But thank you for your contributions as well. I think we can...
Just one question. You've done all these years of research on food and nutrition. Can you tell me how it's affected you and what you put on your dinner plate? For you and your family? Just an anecdote. I'd be interested to know. What do you choose at the supermarket? Do you choose organic, for example?
Okay, so the question is, back to me. Well, I'm lucky that I live in a nice part of Devon where we've got a lot of organic producers. So we've got biodynamic and permaculture farms, and you can get veggie boxes every week if you want. So I usually get something like that. Eat a whole food diet. I'm mostly vegetarian, not completely vegetarian anymore, but mostly vegetarian. I travel a lot for work, so I have to eat what's put in front of me a lot of the time. And my feeling about food is that if you can be in control of most of your diet, that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with eating a few things that are outside your normal range. One, to be sociable, and 2, to be practical. And that our bodies can cope with quite a range of things, but worry for the most part about what is your bulk of your diet, rather than worrying about every time you go and step foot outside the house, what do you eat? That would be a recommendation. So food is sociable as well as nutritional, so we want to use food in a sociable way, even if that means eating something you might not usually eat, given your own choice. My feeling is, have the piece of chocolate cake to celebrate somebody's birthday, and don't worry about it.